Have you ever been into the Char Bar downtown?
Just one time, I think.
Um,
Yeah, you said last time you saw Charles.
Charles Gordon was one of those guys that I think his hair turned gray and then white, kind of prematurely. It gave him more of an aged look than he merited. I'm going to guess that when he held court, and he really didn't hold court. He stood guard of his restaurant. Um, he was probably in his 40s, but he had this magnificently, exotically beautiful wife. And I don't think you saw Charles there without seeing her there. I don't remember her name, if I ever do it. She appeared to be younger than him. I have a feeling, in retrospect, she probably wasn't. But he would, when you went in the door, you're on the floor, there's booths by the window, there's more booths in the center, then there's that counter that you approached. And I think there was a booth to the right of the open door. And then there was like about 2 or 3 steps that went down, not into a full basement. It was an alcove, and there was actually at least one table back there, maybe a two-top that was built into the wall like a booth. So Charles oftentimes would stand either at the top of those 2 or 3 steps, or maybe in the bottom, which would have been awkward because I think that's how you got to the restrooms. But he would just take it in. He just almost motionless and without much facial expression. He's just keeping an eye on everything. Not in a judgmental way, but night after night after night of this. And, I'm not aware that there were many shenanigans, or certainly I'm not aware there was ever any violence or anything like that. Shenanigans might have been somebody speaking loudly at one of the tables or something. Because everybody was really there to enjoy themselves. Some people were there to get something to eat because they'd been drinking up the street all night. But like I say, I don't remember ever seeing him without her there. Years later, because gradually they get rid of Sherberts, and I don't know how long well, keep in mind, he had his brother, Robert. Robert actually had a big concession at the, what they called the French Market, that back in its heyday in the 70s was a very popular place to go for people up around Bush Boulevard and 161. So Robert stayed up there for a long time, and they might have even had a concession trailer.
Was that like the continent?
Yes.
The continent?
Yes. The French Market was the eating part of the continent. And then there were apartments and there were storefronts that sold things like clothing and stuff. But it was pretty popular and I think successful until it wasn't. So comes decades later, and there's this place that opened up next to the new Hilton. Actually, I don't know how it could have been. I can't remember. There might have just been a big drop off from the sidewalk where that Hilton is now, because right next to it is a Char Bar, but the building is possibly from 1800s. That's just seeing it on the surface, the sidewalk, because then below that you've got another business that is boarded up. It's an address. There's a door, but there's shades drawn down, and there's no indication that there's anybody renting in there. But it's a separate building from the Char Bar building, and then you got Martini's restaurant. But I forget. It had been a series of restaurants that failed back in the 80s. One had like kind of a cheesy uh, Goodfellas type, intentionally a Goodfellas type vibe to it, of hoodlums and mafia and stuff like that. But once we were there eating, and the manager insisted on taking us down to the basement, and it was like going through this corridor, which wasn't even brick; it was like stone block. I mean, it was like something from another era. And you're down in the basement, which I think they still use as a party room or something. You get down there, and then there's a big, wasn't even a door, just a wooden wall. But you could tell from the trimmings on the outside it had been a door at one time. It was a tunnel that went underneath High Street to make it easy for the train crews that would come in. The trains had a cook and had a kitchen car. And the passenger trains had much more than that, but these are just the regular freight trains, because you'd have a crew. You always had to have people working the trains. So you'd have a sleeper berth for the crew, and you'd have a cook in there making meals for the crew, because, next day they're in Indiana, and the day after that they're in Nebraska and stuff. So the cook would run underneath High Street and up the stairs, might stop for a beer or two, but he'd go into North Market. Remember our neighbor, Roy Kimes? He witnessed this personally because he was working. His father and uncle started the meat stand, but he took them over, and he told me that he would just sell pounds and pounds and pounds, selling ground beef, selling bacon, selling ham and stuff like that. And that was just one train. He said, he could tell stories, I'll tell you. He was talking about the bar that Barley's was in. That was, well, I guess it's still there, but that block probably had more bars than it had people. And again, not just for the train crowd, but it just so happened that was the railroad part of town, and so it was busy with railroad type activities. And he said the cops, they were chasing this thief. I guess he went in the front door and out the back door of that bar, and went in. And this might have been before the fire, because Roy's family was set up in there. The fire was in 1948. So it might have been before the Quonset hut. It was the old North Market. And he says, the cops would be chasing him through the side door of the North Market. Wayne Heil had a bunch of stories about the old North Market. We call it Studio 35 now, but for the longest time it was called Marzetti's, because that was the name on the marquee, and it might have, in a smaller type, it might have said Studio 35, because I think he gave it that name. But he was Chuck Marzetti, and he had a storefront right across the street from our side of the North Market. I guess that's Bruce. And the building's still there. I think there's a counseling service in there for veterans, something like that. But kind of a nondescript building. But his business was popcorn and popcorn balls. And he supplied popcorn as a concession, or at least the machinery, the roasters and stuff like that, possibly to all the movie theaters in town. And that's how he got in the movie theater. And he didn't always want to own a theater, but he was in the business and had a chance to buy Studio 35, so he did. He was in there a lot. The old German people. They were on the west wall. So there was the restaurant, and then there was this really nice German food stand of traditional German cold cuts and stuff like that. And it was owned and operated by Jurgens. John, no, not Jurgen.
Jorgensen's?
No, it was 2 syllables. I almost said it was the German word for man. Anyway, they were real German people, but nice people, and probably the best looking stand in the market. Well, he eventually sold that to Plank, who I noticed just died last week. He was like 93 or something. Cannot remember his first name, but Wayne Heil just about slept at the North Market. He did sleep in his parked van across the street next to Marzetti's. He didn't have a home to go home to. And his son worked for him, and then he had these 3 women that may or may not have been sisters, and they came in and did all of the work to make today's lunches. And even though the market stayed open till 5 or 7, by lunchtime it was all done for Wayne, and he put up with no shit from the market people ever, because he went back to an earlier time. So anyway, somebody once told me that they came in early on a Saturday morning, and Wayne was laying on one of those picnic tables that they put in before Linda opened up her pizza place. There were a couple of picnic tables down there. And Wayne was like, sleeping face up. Kind of sad, but he was from McConnellsville. So he knew Billy Bob and he knew Denzel. He knew our people.
Wow.
Yeah, he was a year older than Mom. Very proud Navy veteran. I introduced Mom to him because of the McConnellsville connection. But before Jack went in, whoever operated the restaurant, it was Les and Betty. Les and Betty, we sat there with Bubby because we interviewed them to do our catering for our wedding. Les and Betty go back to the days of the Dell. Actually, Betty's family owns the Peacock restaurants in town, which, again, it's funny. When Bubby lived with Bob, that was just down the street from their house, and they would eat there frequently. But they were kind of trying really hard to be hip. Not that they weren't hip, they were. Les came to town. He was from Brooklyn. He a rough guy. There was a lot of free money back in the 70s from the federal government for arts organizations. And one such organization that came to Columbus was called CIFCA. It was an acronym, CIFCA, for Columbus Institute for Contemporary Art. And it was kind of cool, but they had a storefront down by, around, where Warby Parker is? On High Street in the Short North. Yeah, down in that block. And they eventually, because they were always into delis and stuff. Les was a deli guy, and he figured he could make money that way. But he was no longer with CIFCA, because it was federal money and the dollars did run out and stuff. So they found out the Dell was open. Now the Dell, I don't know when it started. I mean,